A 10-year-old girl became pregnant and was abandoned deep in the woods by her parents. But 3 days later, she came back, carrying a terrifying secret that would destroy them all. What dark truth did she bring back? Share your thoughts below and follow the story to uncover the shocking twists. Grace awoke to the sound of retching, the sharp sound of Eva's voice catching in her throat as she stumbled towards the bathroom. The darkness in the room was still heavy, not yet touched by the early morning light. Instinctively, Grace rose from bed, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been jolted awake like this. For weeks now, Eva's bouts of nausea had grown more frequent, more violent. Rushing to the bathroom, Grace found her daughter slumped over the toilet, trembling and pale. Eva, at 10 years old, looked fragile, her usually vibrant eyes dull with exhaustion. Her small frame shivered, and sweat trickled down her temple. Grace knelt beside her, gently brushing her daughter's damp hair away from her face. "Ava, sweetheart, this isn't just a cold anymore," Grace whispered, her voice trembling with worry. "We need to see a doctor." Ava's reaction was immediate. She jerked away from Grace's touch, eyes wide with panic. "No, Mum, please, no doctors." Her voice cracked, trembling with fear. Grace blinked, taken aback by the sudden outburst. "Eva," Grace said softly, trying to calm her. "The doctor will help you. We need to figure out what's going on. I don't know what to do anymore." Tears welled up in Eva's eyes and her breathing became shallow. "Please don't make me go. I can't go to the doctor. They won't help me. I'm fine, I swear." But Grace wasn't convinced. She had been watching Ava closely, and deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. The nausea, the dizziness, the way Eva's body seemed to change, subtle but noticeable. Grace had begun to notice the signs that couldn't be ignored anymore. There were too many similarities to something she feared. Late one night, after another bout of sickness, Grace had driven to the pharmacy in secret. She bought a pregnancy test, her hands shaking as she paid for it. It had been sitting in her dresser drawer for days. When Ava fell asleep that night, her tiny body curled on the couch, Grace couldn't wait any longer. She gently shook her daughter awake, guiding her to the bathroom. "I need you to do this for me, Eva," Grace whispered, handing her the test. "It's just a small thing. I need to know what's happening." Eva's eyes widened, but she didn't resist this time. The test only took a few minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. Grace paced outside the door, her heart pounding in her ears. When Ava finally emerged, holding the test in her trembling hands, the world seemed to slow down. Positive. Grace's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the 2 lines. Her vision blurred, and her knees weakened, threatening to give out beneath her. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath, the weight of the revelation crushing her chest. Grace looked into Ava's eyes, searching for answers, her voice barely a whisper. "Ava, has someone touched you? Is there a man?" Ava shook her head vigorously, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Mom, no one. I swear, no one touched me." Grace didn't know whether to believe her or not. The confusion and fear twisted in her mind. What could this mean? If not abuse, then what? Her hand trembled as she gripped Eva's shoulder. "You have to see a doctor. Please, Eva, you need help. I can't. I don't know what to do." But Eva recoiled, her face contorting in a mixture of fear and defiance. "No doctors. I won't go. I don't care what that test says. I'm not going to the doctor," she screamed, her voice filled with a fury that Grace had never heard before. Eva bolted from the bathroom, her small frame darting down the hallway like a wild animal escaping a trap. Grace chased after her, but by the time she reached her, Eva was hiding under the dining table, curled up into a tight ball. Grace crouched down, her voice breaking. "Please, Eva, I'm scared. I don't know how to help you if you don't let me." Eva's voice was barely audible from under the table. "Hospitals, doctors, they're cold. They make you feel worse. I can't go there, Mum. Please don't make me go." Grace sank to the floor, the weight of exhaustion and helplessness pressing down on her. How had things come to this? How had her vibrant little girl turned into this fearful, desperate child? She covered her face with her hands, fighting back tears. As much as she wanted to, she couldn't force Eva. The girl's panic was real, overwhelming. "I'm failing you, aren't I?" Grace whispered into the silence, more to herself than to Eva. She was a mother who didn't know how to save her child. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become a place of shadows. In the tranquility of the house of the Herrera, the days passed with a heavy load of concern and fear. The little Eva, only 10 years old, was still suffering an pregnancy of alarming pains, recurring vomiting, dizziness that made her shake like a leaf in the wind, and the pains that shrank her in a corner of the sofa, her little body struggling against an invisible enemy. David returned home after another long trip. His work had taken him away for weeks this time, and Grace had been counting the days for his return, hoping that perhaps his presence would ease some of the tension building in their home. Eva, their quiet, contemplative daughter, had always been deeply attached to her father. Despite her shy nature, Eva had a special bond with David, one that Grace had always found beautiful. Before everything began to unravel, David and Eva had been inseparable. Eva, wise beyond her 10 years, never had many friends. She was always a bit reserved, preferring the comfort of books and her own thoughts rather than playing with other kids. Grace had often worried about her daughter's isolation, but David had a way of breaking through Eva's quiet demeanor. He had a ritual of coming into Eva's room after every work trip, no matter how tired he was, and reading her stories. Sometimes he'd even fall asleep there, both of them curled up under a blanket, Eva's small frame resting against him, her breathing peaceful. Grace remembered how Eva's eyes would light up when she heard the front door open, and how David would scoop her up, telling her tales from his trips before diving into the bedtime story they had left unfinished. In those moments, there was a sweetness between them that softened the world. Grace had often stood at the doorway, watching the two of them, her heart swelling with love and contentment. David was always the one who made Eva feel seen and understood, especially when the outside world felt too big for her. It was during one of these late evenings, after David's return from the trip. As he opened the door, the heavy silence of the house struck him like a disconcerting force. The quiet was suffocating, too heavy. He found his wife, Grace, sitting on the edge of the couch, her eyes lost in deep concern, staring into nothingness. Her forehead was furrowed with worry, her face reflecting fear and anguish. He found Grace sitting alone, her face etched with worry. As soon as he walked through the door, the silence between them spoke volumes. The air in the house was thick with unspoken words, the tension like a weight pressing down on them both. "Grace," he muttered, rubbing his eyes, "are you okay?" Grace hesitated. Then, her voice low and trembling, she told him everything. She explained how Eva had been getting worse, how the vomiting had become more frequent, how she refused to see a doctor, but most of all, how she had taken a pregnancy test. The results had been positive. David froze, his face draining of color. What did you say? Grace's heart ached as she repeated it. Eva's pregnant, David. I don't know how, but the test came back positive. David stood there for a moment, staring at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Then suddenly his hand shot to his forehead, wiping away the cold sweat that had formed there. His breath quickened, his body stiffening. "No," he whispered, his voice thick with panic. "No, this can't be happening." Grace reached out to him, but David stepped back, avoiding her touch. His eyes darted wildly around the room as if searching for an escape. "She's not pregnant, Grace. She can't be." You can't take her to the doctor. They'll ask questions. No one can know about this." Grace's brow furrowed, confusion mingling with fear. "David, we have to take her to the doctor. She's our daughter. She's sick and—" "No!" David snapped, cutting her off sharply. His voice was louder now, panicked. "We're not taking her anywhere. No doctors. No one can know. Do you hear me, Grace?" His reaction stunned her. Grace had expected worry, maybe even anger, but this level of fear— it was as if the very thought of Eva being examined by a doctor terrified him more than the idea of her being sick. His hands shook as he paced around the room, mumbling under his breath. "What's going on, David?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you so scared?" Before they could continue, David stood up abruptly. The anxiety, the fear, it was too much. His mind reeled with the weight of it all. I have to go back to work. Something urgent just came up." His words were hurried, desperate, and without waiting for a response, he grabbed his keys and darted out of the house, leaving Grace stunned. His departure was as sudden as a flash of lightning cutting through a stormy sky. Outside, the air was thick, and David's chest tightened. He couldn't face it. Not now. Not Eva. In the days that followed, David's behavior grew even more erratic. He spent more time at the bar, drowning himself in liquor, as if trying to forget. Later that night, long after the sun had set and the house had been consumed by the silence of the night, the back door opened with a soft groan. David returned, but it wasn't the triumphant return of a man who had solved a problem. Instead, he was a broken figure, dragging with him the heavy scent of alcohol and despair. His footsteps were slow and unsteady, carrying him straight to the bedroom where Grace was already waiting for him, wrapped in a blanket of worry. She had been hoping for something, anything, to change. But when she saw the state David was in, her heart sank even further. The man she once loved seemed so distant, so lost. David's eyes were clouded, not only by the effects of alcohol, but by something deeper, something darker. Tears welled up in his eyes, and with a voice that was barely a whisper, cracked and full of emotion, he spoke. "I love you, Grace. Please, promise me you'll stay by my side. Don't leave me. I can't handle this alone." Moved by the raw vulnerability in his words, Grace held him tightly, trying to anchor him. "I will always be your wife, David. Whatever happens, we'll get through this together." For a brief moment, it seemed like everything would be okay. David let himself fall into bed, exhausted. Sleep came quickly for him, but it wasn't peaceful. His dreams were heavy, agitated, haunted by whatever demons he couldn't shake. Hours passed, and as the house lay in deep silence, a small figure approached the bed. It was Eva, moving quietly, her tiny frame almost ghost-like in the dim light. She stood at the foot of the bed, staring intently at her father, her large, serious eyes fixated on him. When David stirred and opened his eyes, the shock of seeing her standing there made his heart leap in his chest. "Dad!" Ava's voice was calm but unnervingly mature. "We need to talk." David flinched at the sound of her voice, his heart racing. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't face her. His fear was palpable, suffocating him. "No, Ava, I can't do it now," he whispered, his voice trembling. I need to get out." With shaky hands, David pulled himself from the bed, dressed hastily, and stumbled out of the room. Without another word, he left the house, vanishing into the night, seeking refuge in the only place that seemed to offer any escape: the bar. Grace, having woken up during the brief exchange, found Eva still standing by the bed, her small shoulders trembling slightly. The sight of her daughter like this, abandoned emotionally by her father, broke Grace's heart. "What did you want to tell Daddy?" Grace asked softly, her voice filled with concern and love. Eva looked up at her mother, her voice small, almost a whisper. "I'm scared, Mum. I wanted to tell him that I feel so lonely and scared. I need him here. I don't understand why he keeps leaving when I need him most." Tears welled up in Grace's eyes as she pulled Eva into her arms. "I don't understand it either, sweetheart. But together, we'll find a way to get through this. I promise you're not alone. I'm here, with you, always." Mother and daughter sat there in the dark, clinging to each other as if their embrace was the only thing keeping them grounded. Outside, David was nowhere to be found, lost in his own turmoil, his own guilt. That night, wrapped in a sepulchral silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the house, David returned, carrying no trace of alcohol on his breath, but bearing a far darker weight in his heart. Grace stood at the entrance, waiting for him, hoping to find some sign of the man she once knew, the one who had always been her anchor. But as he stepped into the dimly lit house, his eyes were wild, restless, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. David didn't look at her directly at first. His hands were cold and trembling as he took hers, his grip almost desperate. Grace felt a shiver run through her as she sensed something terrible was about to be revealed. She could see the battle in his eyes, the guilt, the fear, the helplessness. "Grace," he began, his voice rough, as if it was painful to speak. "You know, we adopted Eva because we couldn't have children of our own. We gave her everything we had, but now it's all gone. Everything we worked for, spent. It's gone, absorbed by the adoption, the medical bills, everything." He paused, his gaze shifting as if trying to anchor himself to something, but finding nothing but the abyss of despair. Grace's heart tightened, her voice barely a whisper, her fear rising like a tide. "What are you saying, David?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting away again before he continued, his voice shaking under the weight of the confession he was about to make. "We have nothing left. We can't even afford to take Eva to the doctor, and I've noticed something, Grace. In her belly. Something is growing. This isn't normal. You've seen it too, haven't you?" Tears welled up in Grace's eyes as David's words sank in. She had noticed the changes in Eva, her belly swelling, the sickness that wouldn't go away, but she had buried her fears, hoping, praying it was all some temporary sickness, something that would pass. Now, hearing David say it out loud, the weight of it became too real. "David, what are we going to do?" Grace's voice cracked as she stepped back, tears slipping down her cheeks. "This can't be happening. Not to our Ava." David's face contorted with pain, his words barely more than a ghostly whisper. "There's only one way, Grace. We have to. Let her go." Grace blinked, confused, unsure of what he meant. David closed his eyes, as if trying to block out the horror of the idea he was about to suggest. If Ava dies while she's with us, we'll be held responsible. We could go to prison for negligence. The only way to save ourselves is to take her to the forest, leave her there. She won't survive for long, and we'll be safe from the law. His voice cracked on the last word, the guilt and fear ripping through him. He couldn't meet her eyes. Grace recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest, horrified by the monstrous suggestion that had come from the man she loved. Her throat tightened as she struggled to find her voice. How can you even think that, David? She's our daughter. I don't care if she's adopted. I love her as if she were my own. How could you suggest something so cruel? David's hands trembled violently as he ran them through his hair, his eyes wide and filled with desperation. I know, Grace. I know. And it's tearing me apart inside. But we have to think practically now. We can't save her. I'm trying to protect us. Protect you from what's coming. We have to do this. You and me, together. In good times and bad, we promised. His words hit Grace like a blow to the chest. She stood there, rooted to the spot, her mind whirling in a storm of emotions. She loved David. She had stood by him through so much. He had been her rock, her partner, and they had built this life together. But now he was asking her to make a choice that no mother, no human being should ever have to make. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, her voice barely audible. She's just a child, David. Our child. I can't leave her out there to die. I can't. But as she spoke, she could see the desperation in David's eyes, the fear that had taken root in his soul. He wasn't just asking her to do this, he was begging her to be complicit in something unspeakable because he was too terrified to face the consequences of doing anything else. Grace's heart felt like it was being torn in two. She looked at David, the man who had once been Eva's hero, the father who used to read her stories and hold her close, the man who now couldn't even look his daughter in the eye. How had they come to this? How had everything unraveled so completely? I love her, David. She's my daughter too. I can't... You think I don't love her? David's voice cracked as he finally met her gaze, his eyes wild with anguish. I love her, Grace, more than anything. But what choice do we have? Do you want us both to go to prison? Do you want us to lose everything? She's sick and there's no cure for what's happening to her. Grace's chest heaved with sobs as she collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't imagine abandoning Eva, couldn't imagine leaving her out there in the cold, alone and scared. But David's fear was suffocating her, pushing her toward a decision she wasn't sure she could live with. The room was thick with the weight of their desperation. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by Grace's quiet sobs and David's ragged breathing. Finally, Grace looked up, her face streaked with tears, her voice hollow. I don't know if I can do this, David. I don't know if I can live with myself if we do this. David knelt beside her, his hands gripping hers tightly. I can't do it without you, Grace. Please. I need you to help me. I don't know what else to do. Grace stared at him, her heart breaking, her mind racing with thoughts of Eva, the little girl who had grown up too fast, who had always been so calm, so mature beyond her years. The little girl who had trusted them, loved them, the daughter who had no idea that her parents were contemplating the unimaginable. In that moment, Grace felt the weight of her world collapsing around her. She was torn between her love for Eva and her loyalty to David. And as the storm inside her raged, she realized that no matter what choice she made, nothing would ever be the same again. With a heart full of sorrow and guilt, Grace whispered the words she never thought she'd say. "All right, David, we'll do it." As the faint light of dawn broke through the heavy clouds, the house was filled with an unnatural stillness. Grace moved like a shadow through the rooms, preparing Eva for the day. The small girl, filled with excitement, couldn't contain her joy. She had no idea what was to come. "Mom, are we really going to the zoo today?" Eva's voice was light, her eyes bright with innocence. Grace nodded, her throat tightening as she forced a smile. "Yes, honey. We'll see all the animals. Just finish your breakfast, okay?" Her hands trembled as she poured milk into Eva's glass, each second stretching into an eternity. David watched from the doorway, his face expressionless, but his eyes, those eyes that once softened in the presence of his daughter, now reflected only cold determination. Eva packed her little bag with snacks and toys, eager for the adventure she believed awaited her. She skipped out to the car, her ponytail bouncing with every step, oblivious to the heavy air of dread that clung to her parents. As the car pulled away from the house, Grace glanced back at their home, now feeling like a tomb. Her heart ached, not just from the guilt of what they were about to do, but from the realization that they could never go back to the life they once had. The drive into the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. The road wound deeper into the trees, the shadows growing longer, the sunlight filtering through the branches in thin, pale beams. Grace sat in silence, her hands clenched in her lap, fighting the urge to scream. Beside her, David kept his gaze fixed on the road, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Eva, oblivious to the tension, chattered happily from the back seat. "Dad, are we still going to the zoo? This doesn't look like the way." Her voice was a mix of curiosity and unease. David forced a smile, his voice strained but steady. "We're taking a secret path today, sweetheart. We'll see the animals that live in the forest before we get to the zoo." Eva nodded, satisfied with the answer, but Grace could see the flicker of doubt in her daughter's eyes. The girl had always been mature for her age, far more perceptive than they gave her credit for. Grace turned to the window, unable to bear looking at Eva any longer. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she bit her lip to keep from sobbing. How had it come to this? How had they gone from a loving family to plotting such a monstrous act? "Mom!" Eva's voice broke through Grace's thoughts. "Why are you crying? Are you feeling sick?" Grace quickly wiped her tears, forcing a shaky smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little tired, that's all." But the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Eva reached out a small hand, touching her mother's face with the same tenderness that Grace had once shown her. It took everything in Grace not to break down right there in the car, but she couldn't. Not yet. The car finally came to a stop deep in the woods, where the trees grew so thick that even the sunlight struggled to reach the ground. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. David stepped out first, moving mechanically, as though each step was a chore. Grace followed, her legs weak, barely able to support her weight. Eva hopped out of the car, looking around with wide eyes, still believing this was part of some grand adventure. David crouched down to her level, his voice shaky but gentle. "Eva, we need you to wait here for a minute, okay? Just stay by the trees while your mum and I check something." Eva's smile faltered. "But we're going to the zoo, right?" "Of course," David replied, his words dripping with false cheer. "This is just part of the special forest. Stay here and we'll be back soon." As David stood up, he took Grace's arm, pulling her aside and whispering urgently, "We need to leave now. We can't turn back." Grace's heart hammered in her chest, her vision blurred by tears. She looked over at Eva, who stood patiently by the trees, clutching her backpack. How could they do this? How could they leave her? But the weight of David's grip and the fear in his eyes pushed her forward. Without another word, they got back into the car, and David hit the gas, the vehicle lurching forward, kicking up dirt and leaves in their wake. Ava's small figure grew smaller in the rearview mirror until she disappeared completely into the forest's shadows. In the sudden silence that followed, Ava called out into the vast emptiness, her voice echoing against the towering trees. "Mom! Dad! Where are you? This isn't funny anymore." Each shout became more desperate, but only the forest responded with its hollow, eerie quiet. Eva's heart pounded in her chest, the reality of her situation slowly dawning on her. She was alone. For a brief moment, fear flickered within her, but it was quickly drowned out by something far more potent. Rage. The betrayal by the people she had trusted most hit her like a wave. They had abandoned her, left her to die like she was nothing. But Ava wasn't a helpless child anymore, not in her heart. Her fists clenched at her sides, her breath steadying as anger replaced her fear. "I'll survive," she muttered to herself, her voice thick with fury. "I'll survive, and I'll make them pay for this." Back in the car, Grace collapsed into herself, her sobs uncontrollable as they sped down the road, each mile taking them further from their daughter. She clutched her stomach, the guilt eating her alive, while David remained silent, his face a mask of grim determination. But beneath that mask, something else simmered, something darker. When they arrived home, the air in the house took on a strange, distorted quality. Grace wandered aimlessly through the rooms, consumed by grief, but David moved differently. His steps were lighter, his mood strangely buoyant. He hummed softly to himself, a tune that seemed horribly out of place given what they had just done. As Grace sank onto the couch, tears still streaming down her face, David walked over to her. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her on the forehead with a tenderness that made Grace shiver. His happiness was disconcerting, unsettling. "We did it," David whispered, his voice laced with joy. "Now we can move on. We can start fresh, just you and me." Grace pulled away, staring at him in disbelief. "David, how can you say that? How can you be happy? We just left our daughter to die in the woods. How are you not—" David cut her off with another kiss, his eyes cold, but his smile wide. "Because it's over now. It's behind us. We can start over, have our own children. Don't you see? This is the best thing for us." Grace recoiled, a wave of nausea rising within her. She couldn't understand how he could be acting like this, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just crossed an unforgivable line. "You're scaring me," she whispered, her voice trembling. But David didn't seem to notice. He stood up, practically skipping across the room, humming again, his feet tapping lightly on the floor. Grace watched him, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling. This wasn't the man she had married. Something had changed in David. Something dark had taken root in him, and it terrified her. And as she lay in bed that night, listening to the faint hum of David's unsettling melody from the other room, she realized she was no longer just mourning the loss of her daughter. She was mourning the loss of the man she thought she knew. In the depths of the forest, Ava stood alone, the weight of her isolation pressing in from all sides. But instead of succumbing to despair, she embraced the anger that burned within her. With steady hands, she removed the belt that had been wrapped tightly around her stomach, revealing the truth hidden beneath. her belly, swollen as if 6 months pregnant, a secret she had kept from even herself until now. Her eyes, once filled with innocence, now burned with a fire of revenge. And with that, Ava set her sights on one goal: survival. Because surviving meant one thing: revenge. The house was submerged in silence, the kind of silence that made the air thick and heavy. It was late, the kind of late where the only sound is the occasional creak of the old wooden floor settling into the night. David and Grace were sound asleep, completely unaware of the presence creeping through the house. Ava, barefoot, her movements barely a whisper, stepped slowly down the hallway. Her face, once filled with the innocence of childhood, was now wrinkled with rage, her eyes dark and hollow, like a woman who had seen the worst parts of life and come back more broken than before. She had been gone for 3 days, 3 long days since David and Grace had left her alone in the woods, certain she would never return. But Ava was back. And the Eva that stood in the dark of their house was no longer the naive little girl they had abandoned. Her body was weak, her clothes tattered, her hair matted and dirty. In her hand, Eva gripped a knife. She had found it in the kitchen as soon as she entered the house. It was cold in her hand. She pushed open the door to their bedroom, watching as her so-called parents lay sleeping peacefully, as though they hadn't abandoned her to die just days ago. Ava raised the knife above her head, the blade catching a glint of moonlight from the window. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming surge of rage that flooded her veins. The need for revenge was stronger than any fear she might have once felt. Grace stirred in her sleep, her body shifting as an unsettling feeling washed over her. Something was wrong. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Ava, standing over her, a knife raised high, her face cold, emotionless. Grace gasped, throwing herself to the side just as the knife came down, slicing through the air and grazing her pillow instead of her throat. "David!" Grace screamed, her voice breaking the silence in an instant. David shot up in bed, disoriented, his eyes wide as they took in the scene before him. Eva, their daughter, or what had once been their daughter, was standing at the foot of the bed, her chest heaving with rage, the knife still clenched tightly in her hand. "Ava?" David's voice cracked, his confusion and fear palpable. Ava's eyes flicked to him, and a twisted smile curled at the edges of her mouth. "Surprised to see me?" Her voice was low, deeper than it had been before. It no longer carried the soft tone of a child. Now, it was something else. Something bitter, cold, and full of hatred. "Ava, put the knife down," David stammered, slowly getting out of bed, his hands raised as if trying to calm a wild animal. But Ava wasn't an animal. She was far more dangerous than that now. "Why?" Ava's voice was laced with venom. "You didn't care when you left me out there to die, did you? You thought you could get rid of me that easily?" David took a step forward, trying to find the words, but Ava cut him off, her voice rising in anger. "I survived. I didn't die like you wanted, and now you're going to pay for what you did." Grace, still reeling from her near death, crawled backward on the bed, her heart racing, her mind spinning. "Ava, please. We didn't want to," she started, but Ava's laughter, sharp and cruel, cut through her words. "Didn't want to." Ava's voice dripped with malice. "You left me there, alone. You wanted me gone, didn't you? But I'm not 10 years old, Grace. I'm not some helpless little girl." Ava's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to the bed, the knife gleaming in her hand. I'm 6 months pregnant, and David, your precious husband, is the father of the child I'm carrying." Grace's world stopped. Her breath caught in her throat, her body frozen in shock. The room seemed to close in on her, her vision tunneling as Ava's words echoed in her ears. "No, no, that's impossible," Grace whispered, her voice shaking, her eyes darting between Ava and David, desperately searching for some denial, some explanation. "Ava, you're only 10 years old." Eva's expression hardened, her eyes locking onto Grace with a cold, steady gaze. "No, I'm not. I'm 32 years old. I have a condition, dwarfism." David knew. "He's known since the day you adopted me. But he didn't care, did you, David?" Her voice dripped with disgust. David's face had gone white, his body rigid with terror. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. Ava's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she saw the shock on Grace's face. "Oh, yes," she continued, her voice low and taunting. "David and I have been lovers for a long time now. Every night while you were asleep, he would come into my room. You thought we were just reading bedtime stories, didn't you? But no, we were doing far more than that." Grace felt her stomach turn, nausea rising in her throat. "Shut up," she hissed, her vith a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You're lying. You're just trying to hurt me." But Eva's cruel smile only widened. "Lying? Oh no, Grace, I'm telling you the truth. David couldn't keep his hands off me. He needed me. I gave him what you couldn't." She paused, letting her words sink in, her voice dripping with venom. "And he loved it. Every second of it." "Shut your mouth!" David snapped, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "That's enough, Ava." Eva's laughter echoed through the room, cold and bitter. "Enough? You didn't think it was enough when you were sneaking into my bed night after night, did you, David?" Grace's hands trembled as she stared at her husband, her mind racing, trying to process the horror of what Ava was saying. And then she saw it. The look in David's eyes, the guilt, the shame, the silence. It was all the confirmation she needed. "You disgusting monster!" Grace shrieked, her hands shaking with rage. "You filthy whore! I raised you. I loved you like my own, and this is how you repay me? You're nothing but a cheap, lying slut." Ava didn't flinch. She stood there, her smile never fading, her eyes never leaving Grace's. "I didn't just repay you, Grace," she sneered. "I gave your husband what you never could. I satisfied him. Every night. While you were asleep, he was with me. And he loved every second of it." Grace's vision blurred with tears as her heart shattered into a million pieces. She lunged at Eva, but David grabbed her, holding her back. "Stop it, Grace," he shouted, his voice breaking under the weight of his own guilt. "Just stop." But Grace wasn't listening. Her mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and pain. "You're disgusting, Ava. You've ruined everything. I took you in, I cared for you, and this is how you thank me. You're a disgrace." Ava's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "I didn't ruin anything, Grace. David did. He wanted me. He came to me first, not you. You should have known all along." Grace struggled in David's grip, her screams turning into sobs as the weight of the betrayal crashed down on her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Everything she had believed, everything she had loved, had crumbled in an instant. Ava stepped closer, her voice a whisper now, low and taunting. "You were never enough for him, Grace. I was. And now I'm carrying his child. So you tell me, who's the real wife here?" Grace fell to her knees, her sobs racking her body as she screamed into the silence. "You're both monsters. I hate you both. I hope you both rot in hell." Eva smiled down at her, cold and unfeeling. "Don't worry, Grace. Hell is exactly where we're all headed." With a quick, deliberate movement, she raised the knife again, her eyes fixed on Grace. "This ends now," she whispered, stepping forward, ready to bring the blade down. But just as the knife was about to strike, David threw himself between them. "No!" he shouted, grabbing Eva's arm in midair, the blade inches from Grace's heart. Eva's face contorted with fury, and she twisted violently in David's grip, trying to free herself. The room erupted into chaos, the air thick with panic and raw emotion. David struggled to restrain Eva, his hands shaking as he fought to keep her from plunging the knife into Grace's chest. "Let me go!" Eva shrieked, her voice wild with desperation. She swung the knife toward David, but her grip faltered as he tightened his hold on her wrist. "Let me kill her! She deserves this!" "Stop it!" David roared, wrestling with her. His strength, driven by fear, overpowered her for a moment, and in that instant, Eva's grip slipped. The knife clattered to the floor, its metallic echo reverberating through the room like a bell, tolling for the inevitable destruction. Grace's eyes snapped to the blade as it spun to a halt on the cold wooden floor. Something inside her snapped. The rage that had been building, the betrayal, the lies. It all surged forward, flooding her mind. Without hesitation, she lunged toward Eva, her body moving faster than her thoughts, pure instinct taking over. She no longer saw the child she had once cared for. She saw a threat, a monster that needed to be stopped. With a primal scream, Grace tackled Eva to the ground, her hands reaching out, fingers clawing at Eva's face. The force of the impact sent both of them crashing to the floor. Eva grunted in surprise, her body twisting beneath Grace's, but Grace wasn't holding back anymore. She had spent too long being a victim, too long accepting the lies and the deception. Now it was time to fight back. "You filthy bitch!" Grace screamed, her voice raw and guttural. "I loved you, I raised you, and this is how you repay me?" Grace's hand came down hard across Eva's face, the slap echoing in the room. "Shut up!" she shouted, her voice cracking with fury. "Shut up!" Eva's laughter, cold and mocking, only fueled Grace's anger. "You're pathetic, Grace. That's why David came to me. You could never satisfy him. You were never enough." "Liar!" Grace's fist slammed into Eva's jaw, the impact knocking her head back against the floor. "You're the liar!" Eva coughed, blood trickling from her split lip, but the smile never left her face. Grace's screams echoed through the walls, David's desperate shouts blending with the sound of fists and bodies colliding. The neighbors had already heard enough. Frightened and unsure of what was unfolding, they had done the only thing they could. They called the police. The front door burst open with a crash, the sudden intrusion breaking the deadlock of violence that had gripped the family. Armed police officers stormed in, their voices commanding, slicing through the chaos with the weight of authority. "Hands up, everyone! Hands where we can see them!" Eva's hand clenched around the knife, her fingers tightening as if unwilling to release her final hold on revenge. Her eyes flickered from David to Grace, the knife trembling in her grip, but even with the police closing in, she wasn't ready to let go. This was supposed to be her moment, the culmination of all the hatred that had built up inside her. She had waited too long for this. She had suffered too much to be stopped now. But it was too late. An officer grabbed her wrist before she could react, the cold steel of handcuffs clamping down around her, pulling her away from the scene she had so carefully planned. Eva's body went limp for a moment, her eyes narrowing into slits as she turned to David, a smile, small but vicious, curling at the corners of her mouth. "You'll never be rid of me," she whispered, her voice low and filled with malice. You'll carry this with you forever." David didn't respond. He couldn't. His body had frozen, his mind too overwhelmed by what had just happened. He watched as Eva was led away, her head held high, as if proud of what she had accomplished. She didn't scream, didn't fight. She had gotten what she wanted. The destruction of the Herrera family was complete. Hours later, the house was still, but the air inside was suffocating. Grace sat at the edge of the couch, her body hunched over, her hands gripping the edge of her seat as if the very act of sitting still took every ounce of strength she had left. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, and her breath came in slow, shallow gasps. The images of Eva's cold, accusing eyes and David's silence played in a loop in her mind. She couldn't shake them, couldn't quiet the storm of emotions ripping through her. David sat across from her, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He had tried to speak, tried to explain, but Grace had silenced him with a look. There were no words left between them now, no explanations, no excuses that could undo the damage that had been done. The weight of what had been revealed in the past few hours hung between them like a black cloud, suffocating everything that remained of their broken relationship. Grace finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't do this, David." He didn't respond at first, as if her words hadn't fully registered. When he finally looked at her, there was a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "Grace, please. I never meant for it to get this far. I didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to do?" Grace interrupted, her voice rising, the bitterness in her tone unmistakable. "You brought this into our home. You destroyed everything, David. Our family, our lives, everything." She stood, her body shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and fury. "I don't care what you didn't mean. It's done. It's over." David slumped forward, his face falling into his hands, unable to look at her. He had lost the ability to argue, lost any strength to defend himself. There was nothing left to save. Grace stared at him, her eyes filled with the raw pain of betrayal. "I want a divorce," she said flatly, her words like a final nail in the coffin of their shattered marriage. David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "No, Grace. Please, we can try to fix this. We can fix this," she spat, the venom in her voice cutting him like a knife. "There's nothing to fix. It's broken, David. It's all broken, and I can't live like this anymore. I can't look at you without seeing what you did, what you let happen." His eyes filled with tears, the weight of her words crushing him. But Grace wasn't done. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she said, her voice trembling. "It's not just Eva. It's me. I let this happen. I trusted you. I believed in you, and now I can't even trust myself." She turned her back to him, her body tense as she tried to hold herself together, to keep from collapsing into the sobs that threatened to tear her apart. "I'm leaving," she whispered, more to herself than to David. "I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back." David stood, his hands outstretched, pleading, but she didn't turn around. She walked to the door, grabbing her coat from the hook, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't want to give him a chance to stop her. He didn't deserve that chance. As she stepped out into the cold night, Grace felt the first breath of relief she had taken in days. But it was a hollow relief, one that came with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. The family she had once known was gone, destroyed beyond repair, and there was no going back. Wow, what an intense and shocking story, right? I still can't get over how Eva, a quiet 10-year-old girl, went from being abandoned in the woods to revealing such dark and twisted secrets. The moment she returned after 3 days, carrying not just her rage, but a horrifying truth about David, honestly, that left me speechless. And the way everything unraveled between Grace and David, it was just heartbreaking. I didn't expect it to go this far. But what do you guys think? Was Eva's revenge justified, or did things go way too far? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think there was any way the family could have healed? Let's talk about it. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intense stories like this one. Until next time, stay safe and keep the discussions going.